In line with the last two videos, this one will again expose what a cheapskate I am. So this is not a review of the latest Hornby Loriot machine wagon. And as much as I wanted one, I just couldn't justify spending that much. So this video is going to be the full build of the Cambrian kit, which is the British Railways version of the same wagon. The two are very similar, but with some very distinct differences. I'll point them out as we go along. There's probably about a dozen or so parts to this kit. All of the parts seem to be quite clean, with very little flash to be cleaned off. The two things that concern me about this kit though is the weight, because there's not much of it, and where to put the weight if we put some on, and the couplings. I'm not too sure about how that's going to work out either, so we'll see how we go. For the weight issue, I got the old scales out and put the whole bag of bits on it, and it only come to 29 or 30 grams, which is a little light because that includes all of the sprues as well. So a normal wagon should be about 35, 40. So we're going to have to find a cavity to shove about 10 grams into. That weight also included the wheel sets and brass bushes that were the only thing that extra that I had to buy for this kit, which pushed the price up to still less than 20 quid. The build started by painting the wheels with the now infamous knot black and a brown mashed in together and liberally coated on the front, rear and axle. Removing the main components from the sprue, that'll be the floor, the four side frames, the deck and the buffer beams. And after reading the instructions carefully several times, because I really wasn't quite sure what it was telling me, I worked it out in the end and made a start on filing the pieces to make sure they all fitted together extremely well. This was going to be key when we put the wheel sets to the floor. The buffer beam sits on the protrusion to the top right, and then to the left as it sweeps down and round underneath the axle bearing. That is the difference between the Great Western and the British Railways version. The Great Western version, that should be square, pretty much the same as the yellow line on my cutting mat. And you can see that on the Great Western wagon here, which is the Hornby model. Brass bearing cups fit nicely into the hole that's moulded into the side frames on this kit. I opted to hold them in place with a little bit of super glue. Yoo-hoo or any other gummy type glue would be equally as good. As with all kit instructions that are written, sometimes it takes a little bit of working out what it's trying to tell you. And the next bit is the only part of this kit that I struggled with, and I'll quote the sentence that it says on the instructions. Before beginning assembly, it is necessary to file off the raised area X on the underside of the end platforms. And I worked out that that meant these two little nubs that I'm pointing out here with the end of the file. That allows us to fit the headstocks, or as I like and probably many of you like to call it, the buffer beam, to the top plate. The next part was quite tricky, gluing one of the side frames on and then the other, but before the glue had set hard, inserting the wheel sets, then setting it appropriately and gluing on the back piece, then leaving it to dry completely. Doing it before the glue sets hard enables you to make minor adjustments and make sure everything's square, and also that the wheel set fits between the brass bearings with minimal slop. Sometimes when you build these kits and glue the side frames on with the wheels inserted, it has a tendency to pinch the wheel sets, but luckily for me this time it didn't happen and they turned very freely. And that's pretty much it really for this kit. We end up with two wheel set sub-assemblies that attach to the floor incredibly well. The amount of thought and engineering that went into producing this, where the parts just clip together, can only be described as brilliant. There was a little bit of cleanup to do before fitting, but it was only minimal, and then the parts clipped together so well even without glue, which enabled me to get both axles parallel to each other before gluing up. I then made a mistake because I misinterpreted what it was telling me on the written instructions. I noticed that the floor was quite springy at this stage, and there were several parts left on the sprues that I thought were parts that were for something else, and I got a bit confused. Anyway, they were supposed to be strengthening for the floor. Initially, I was going to address the whip in the floor by putting some brass rod on the edges, as you've just seen, but then I thought I'd address the weight issues by putting a piece of lead plate underneath the floor as well. And that helped enormously because it brought the wagon weight up to about 40 grams, which is absolutely brilliant, ideal. To finish off the build, it was a case of attaching all the small detail parts. That included some angled brackets that make up the main body of the wagon, brake blocks, and making sure that they stay far enough away from the wheel that they don't snag it, and also handbrake levers. Now the handbrake on this kit-built wagon differs from that of the Hornby wagon in the fact that this is a lever brake, and the one on the Hornby wagon is the Dean Churchwood sort of handle type handbrake. On the Hornby model, it's been portrayed in the applied position, which would really bug me if I was to buy one. Next was the buffers, but before I attached the brake gear, it was time to put a coupling on, which was an NEM style coupling with some Parkside by Pico mounting blocks. Because there's not very much space where the wheel sets and couplings go, I had to put them on before the brake rigging. I had to cut the brake rigging moulding to get it to fit behind the coupling. This wagon has an open frame type construction, so you can see right into the wheel well. So it's quite important that you put something in there to represent the brake rigging. Construction complete. I thought I'd do this one slightly different for the painting in respect that I'm going to use acrylics as opposed to enamels. First was an all over coat of MIG one-shot black primer. I started on the underside so I could get used to how it was coming out of the airbrush, and unlike some other paints, it is quite forgiving. If you've put a little bit too much on, it does dry flat and doesn't leave ripples. It says in the instructions that the wagon should be painted in an olive drab greeny sort of colour, and after I'd done it I really didn't like it, so I concocted a mix of Tamiya NATO black and MIG gunmetal. It was about 75% NATO black and 25% of the MIG gunmetal. Painting a not black metallic mixture onto a black base isn't easy to film, but you can see the results as I'm putting the transfers on here. The transfers that I applied were from Fox transfers, and they're from many packets that I've accumulated over the years. I couldn't find the exact wording necessary for the transfers, as you can see here of this screenshot off the Paul Bartlett wagon web page, link in the description, but what I did find was close enough. British Railways built 12 wagons in 4 batches over the years. The first batches were handbrake only, the later batches had vacuum through pipe, which is how they came to get the ZXP tops code, P denoting vacuum through pipe. This is where I think Hornby have possibly made a mistake because I don't think any of the Great Western wagons were A, vacuum piped, or B, lasted long enough to gain a tops code. And now to turn it into the grotty, unloved wagon that all the pictures online suggest that they were. First of all, by putting a nice pin wash around all the rivet detail on the deck, and then all the panels on the well floor. I ended up going quite heavy on this, and it looked a little bit awful whilst it was still wet, but once it dried it looked a lot better. And then again, I still wasn't worried, even if it did look a little bit blotchy, because the next step, weathering powders, is going to pretty much obliterate all of that anyway. This is where the making it up as you go along starts to kick in. I decided to put the lighter stuff on the top and the darker stuff on the bottom. I tried, but then it just turned into a mixture of all of the colours that I used. I did the wagon all over with the weathering powders, trying to create different effects on different panels, just so that it didn't look all the same and really bland. Next I went back on with some dark washes and then some wet effects on some of the parts that I thought might benefit from looking like they'd been recently greased or oiled. Now these wagons were, according to the books, built for the sole purpose of conveying plant equipment to track renewal sites. When I say plant equipment, I mean diggers or Hymax bulldozers, like this one pictured in a Facebook group that I'm in, or like these ones on Paul Bartlett's website. And I'd really like to build a kit of something like this to put on this wagon. Now, if anybody knows of any kit that's available of any of these type of things, preferably not the Dapol JCB, because it's alright but not great. If you know of anything that might be suitable for me, please leave a link in a comment below. So I'd like to put this one into revenue earning service, but as we've just discussed, it's an engineer's wagon, so would have spent much of its time languishing at the back of a siding, waiting for the weekend, waiting for a track renewal program so it can spring into action. Engineers' wagons aren't my thing at the moment, but maybe we'll have a look at some other similar wagons in the future, and maybe even try to convert some even older wagons into something a little bit more usable. That's in the future. This has been a kit build of the Cambrian 20-ton Loriot engineer's wagon. It's been thirsty work making this video, so I think I'll go for a cup of tea. Thanks for watching. See you next time.